Around 1200 years before Christ, the ancient world collapsed. Empires that had dominated for centuries were swept away in a few decades. Hittites, Mycenaeans, Canaanites, entire civilizations disappeared. And in the midst of that apocalypse, a mysterious people emerged from the waves of the Mediterranean, armed with technology that no one else possessed. They landed on the coast of Canaan and nearly wiped Israel off the map before there was even a king in Jerusalem. The Bible calls them Philistines. Egyptian hieroglyphs identify them as part of the Sea Peoples, and for over a century, archaeologists, historians, and linguists tried to answer a seemingly simple question. Where did these people come from? The answer transformed everything we knew about Israel's greatest enemy. The Bronze Age collapse was one of the greatest catastrophes in human history. Between 1250 and 1150 years before Christ, virtually all civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean entered simultaneous collapse. The Hittite Empire, which dominated Anatolia and rivaled Egypt, simply vanished. Mycenaean cities in Greece were abandoned or destroyed. Trading centers in Cyprus and Syria turned to ashes. Ugarit, one of the wealthiest cities of the ancient world, was burned and never rebuilt. No one knows exactly what caused this collapse. Some researchers point to severe climate changes that destroyed harvests for consecutive decades. Others speak of chain earthquakes along the Mediterranean's geological faults. There are theories about internal rebellions, collapse of trade routes, pandemics. It was probably all of this together, a cascade effect where each disaster amplified the next. And in the midst of that chaos, entire populations fled. Egyptian records from Pharaoh Ramesses III, carved on the walls of the temple at Medinet Habu, describe waves of invaders arriving by land and sea. The hieroglyphs list names: Peliset, Cheka, Shekelesh, Dani and Weshesh. They came in warships, they came in carts with entire families. They were not just warriors seeking plunder, they were entire peoples seeking new land to live. The Egyptians managed to repel the invasion in two massive battles, one on land and one at sea, around 1175 years before Christ. But they could not prevent part of these refugees from settling to the north, on the coast of Canaan. The Peliset mentioned in the hieroglyphs are the same people the Bible calls Philistines. But where exactly did they come from before appearing in Egyptian records? The Bible offers a clue. Amos chapter 9 verse 7 declares that God brought the Philistines from Caphtor. Jeremiah 47 verse 4 again mentions Caphtor as their origin, and Deuteronomy 2 verse 23 confirms that the Caphtorites destroyed the Avites who lived in the coastal region and settled in their place. Caphtor. Most scholars agree that this name refers to Crete, the largest island in the Aegean, cradle of Minoan civilization. Others argue it may also include coastal regions of Anatolia or islands of the Aegean Sea. Either way, the origin points to the Greco-Aegean world, not the Semitic Near East. And archaeological evidence confirms this impressively. When archaeologists excavated the Philistine cities from the early period, they found pottery completely different from anything produced in Canaan. The style is unmistakably Aegean. Geometric patterns, stylized birds, spirals, decorations that seem taken directly from Mycenae or Crete. In the oldest levels of Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Ekron, this pottery appears suddenly, without gradual transition, without local evolution. One day it did not exist, the next day it dominated. This means abrupt arrival of a new population, not gradual assimilation. But pottery is just the beginning. The Philistines also brought different culinary practices. Analysis of animal bones at Philistine sites shows high consumption of pork, something practically non-existent among Canaanites and Israelites of the time. While Semitic populations avoided pigs for cultural and religious reasons, The Philistines raised and consumed them in large quantities. It was a clear identity marker. Architecture tells the same story. In the oldest Philistine levels, archaeologists found structures with central hearths in the Aegean style, completely different from Canaanite houses with bread ovens in the corner. They also found loom weights specific to the Aegean pattern, indicating that even weaving techniques were imported. And then there is the question of iron. Around 1200 years before Christ, iron was still a rare and precious metal in the Eastern Mediterranean. It existed, but working iron required much higher temperatures than bronze and specific carburization techniques to transform raw iron into usable steel. Few mastered this knowledge. The Philistines mastered it. 1 Samuel chapter 13 verses 19 through 22 describes the situation with brutal clarity. No blacksmith could be found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines had said, "Lest the Hebrews make swords or spears." So all Israel had to go down to the Philistines to sharpen their plowshares, their mattocks, their axes, and their sickles. The price was a pim for the plowshares and for the mattocks, and a third of a shekel for sharpening axes and setting the goads. Try to grasp what this means. Israel could not manufacture weapons. They could not even sharpen agricultural tools without permission and payment to the Philistines. It was absolute economic and military control through technological monopoly. When armies met, Israelites carried slings, clubs, and wooden spears. Philistines carried iron swords that cut through bronze like butter. The advantage was so absurd that Saul and Jonathan were the only ones in all Israel who possessed iron swords and spears. Two men properly armed in an entire army. And this technology came from the Aegean world, where iron metallurgy was already more developed during the collapse period. When the Philistines migrated, they brought blacksmiths, they brought techniques, they brought the knowledge that would transform warfare and agriculture in the following millennium. But superior weapons do not explain everything. The Philistines were also organized differently. While Israel was a loose confederation of tribes united only by emergencies, the Philistines operated as a pentapolis, 5 city-states coordinated under the leadership of 5 Siranim, a term some linguists connect to the Greek tyrannos. Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron functioned as a permanent military alliance, each city contributing troops and resources for joint campaigns. The coastal plain they controlled was the most fertile region in Canaan. Abundant rainfall, rich alluvial soil, access to maritime trade. While Israelite tribes struggled with mountainous terrain and subsistence agriculture, the Philistines harvested surpluses that financed professional armies. And their armies included something Israel did not have: war chariots and heavy infantry. Biblical accounts repeatedly mention Philistine chariots. 1 Samuel chapter 13 speaks of 30,000 chariots gathered for battle against Saul. Even if the number is hyperbolic, it indicates cavalry and chariot strength that Israel simply could not match. War chariots required flat terrain to operate, exactly the type of terrain the Philistines controlled. In the mountains of Judah and Ephraim, they were useless. On the coastal plain and in the Jezreel Valley, they were devastating. Goliath's armor, described in detail in 1 Samuel 17, illustrates the superiority of Philistine equipment. Bronze helmet, scale armor weighing 5,000 shekels of bronze, approximately 125 pounds, bronze greaves on his legs, bronze javelin on his back, spear with a shaft like a weaver's beam, and an iron point weighing 600 shekels, nearly 15 pounds. And still a shield bearer carrying an additional shield in front. David, in contrast, refused Saul's armor because he was not used to it. He went to battle in a shepherd's tunic with a sling and 5 smooth stones from the stream. David's victory was not only spiritual, it was a demonstration that technological superiority has limits. Goliath was prepared for single combat in the Aegean style, where 2 armed champions faced each other. David changed the Rules, keeping his distance, using a projectile weapon that Goliath probably considered cowardice, not legitimate combat. But before David, the Philistines nearly destroyed Israel completely. The Battle of Ebenezer, described in 1 Samuel chapter 4, was absolute disaster. Israel lost about 4,000 men in the first confrontation. In an attempt to reverse the defeat, the elders sent for the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh, believing that the physical presence of the sacred object would guarantee victory. It did not. The Philistines defeated Israel again, killing 30,000 soldiers, including Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of the high priest Eli, and they captured the Ark. Try to imagine the psychological impact. The supreme symbol of God's presence among his people, the object that led the crossing of the Jordan and the fall of Jericho, was now in pagan hands. Eli, upon receiving the news, fell from his chair, broke his neck, and died. His daughter-in-law, upon hearing that her husband was dead and the ark captured, went into premature labor. She gave birth to a son, and before dying, named him Ichabod. The glory has departed. The Philistines took the ark to the temple of Dagon in Ashdod, placing it as a trophy beside the statue of the god. The next morning, the statue had fallen face down on the ground before the ark. They put it back. The next morning, it had fallen again, but this time with its head and hands cut off on the threshold of the door. And then the plagues began. Tumors struck the population of Ashdod. The city transferred the ark to Gath. The tumors followed. Gath transferred it to Ekron. The population of Ekron panicked, refusing to receive the object that was killing Philistines wherever it went. Rats infested the region, destroying crops. After 7 months of disasters, the Philistine priests and diviners ordered the ark to be returned, but not in just any way. They placed it on a new cart pulled by 2 cows that had never been yoked, separated from their calves. If the cows followed their natural instinct, they would return to the calves. If they went straight to Israelite territory against all instinct, it would be confirmation that the God of Israel was really behind the plagues. The cows went straight to Beth Shemesh, lowing along the way, not turning aside to the right or to the left. Even so, Philistine domination over Israel continued for more decades. Samuel chapter 7 mentions that the ark remained in Kiriath Jearim for 20 years, while Israel lamented after the Lord. Deep spiritual reform was necessary before they began to recover lost territory, and Philistine pressure eventually forced the most significant change in Israel's structure: the demand for a king. First, Samuel chapter 8 describes the elders of Israel coming to Samuel to ask for a king like all the nations have. The context was military. They needed unified leadership, a standing army, a command structure that could confront the Philistine threat consistently, not just in sporadic tribal emergencies. Saul was anointed, tall, impressive, initially successful, but his reign was consumed by the Philistine war, and it ended in disaster on Mount Gilboa, where Saul and 3 of his sons died in battle. The Philistines cut off Saul's head, stripped his armor, hung his body on the walls of Beth-shan, and sent messengers throughout all Philistia announcing victory in the temples of their idols. It fell to David, starting as a fugitive who even served the Philistine king of Gath, to finally break the power of the 5 cities. David's campaigns against the Philistines were not a single decisive battle, but a series of confrontations over years. 2 Samuel chapter 5 mentions 2 victories at Baal Perazim and in the valley of Rephaim, shortly after David became king over all Israel. Later, David conquered Gath and its territory, breaking the unity of the Pentapolis. Most importantly, David captured blacksmiths, the prohibition that kept Israel in the Bronze Age while the Philistines operated in the Iron Age was finally broken. Philistine craftsmen, whether captured in war or attracted by payment, began working in Israelite territory. The secret of iron spread. When Solomon built the temple, iron tools cut the stones in the quarries. But who were the gods that the Philistines brought from the Aegean? Dagon was the main one. The temple of Dagon in Gaza is where Samson, blind and chained, pulled down the pillars upon the assembled Philistine leaders, killing more in his death than he had killed in his life. The temple of Dagon in Ashdod was where the ark humiliated the statue of the god for 2 consecutive nights. The name Dagon probably derives from the Semitic word dag, fish, or dagan, grain. Some scholars argue it was an agricultural fertility deity adopted from the Canaanites after arrival. Others see connections with Aegean deities. The truth is that, like many migrant peoples, the Philistines probably merged religious practices from their original land with practices from their new land. Ashtoreth was also worshipped. 1 Samuel chapter 31 mentions that Saul's armor was placed in the temple of Ashtoreth after the Philistine victory at Gilboa. This goddess of fertility and war was common throughout the ancient Near East, under varied names: Ishtar in Mesopotamia, Aphrodite in Greece. Baal-zebub was the god of Ekron. 2 Kings chapter 1 relates that King Ahaziah of Israel, after being injured in a fall, sent messengers to consult Baal-zebub about his recovery. The prophet Elijah intercepted the messengers with severe rebuke. "Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going to inquire of Baal-zebub, the god of Ekron?" The name Baal-zebub means Lord of the Flies. Some scholars believe it was intentional corruption of the real name Baal-zebul, Lord Prince, transformed by the Israelites into an insult. Centuries later, the name Beelzebub would be used in the Gospels as a title for the prince of demons. The Philistine presence also left permanent linguistic and cultural marks. The very word Philistine entered modern languages as a synonym for an uncultured person, ignorant of the arts. Ironic usage, considering that the original Philistines were probably more culturally sophisticated than their Semitic neighbors. The term acquired pejorative connotation in 17th century Germany when university students used it to describe local residents who did not appreciate academic culture. And the name Palestine derives directly from Philistia. When the Romans crushed the Jewish revolts in the 1st and 2nd centuries after Christ, they renamed the province from Judea to Syria Palestina, specifically to erase the Jewish connection to the land, using the name of Israel's ancient enemy as deliberate replacement. A people who disappeared 2,500 years ago still names the region on today's maps. Archaeological excavations in recent decades have revealed fascinating details about Philistine daily life. In Ekron, archaeologists discovered the largest olive oil production center in the ancient Near East. More than 100 olive presses operated simultaneously, producing an estimated 1,000 tons per year. It was industry on an almost modern scale, oriented toward export through Philistine ports. In Ashkelon, excavations revealed what may be the first Philistine cemetery ever found. More than 140 skeletons were recovered, offering a unique opportunity for DNA study. Preliminary results confirm European origin, specifically from southern Europe and the Aegean. The Philistines of the first generations were genetically different from the surrounding Canaanite populations. But in later generations, DNA shows increasing mixture with local populations. In 200 years, the Philistines had extensively intermarried. Culture remained distinctive longer, and pottery, diet, architecture, but the blood was already mostly local. This explains why, in later biblical texts, the Philistines seem less foreign than in narratives from the period of the Yadu judges. In the time of David and Solomon, they were already partially assimilated neighbors, not newly arrived invaders. The existential threat had diminished. Later prophets still pronounced judgments against the Philistine cities. Amos, Zephaniah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel all included Philistia in their oracles of destruction. Zephaniah 2, verses 4 through 7, is particularly detailed. Gaza shall be deserted, and Ashkelon shall become a desolation. Ashdod shall be driven out at noon, and Ekron shall be uprooted. Woe to you, inhabitants of the sea coast, you nation of the Cherethites! The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, land of the Philistines, and I will destroy you until no inhabitant is left. These prophecies were gradually fulfilled. The Assyrian Empire conquered the Philistine cities in the 8th century before Christ. The Babylonian Empire completed the destruction in the 6th century. When the Persians arrived, the Philistines, as a distinct people, had already disappeared, absorbed into the empires that conquered them. But their impact on Israel's history was permanent. It was the Philistines who forced the transition from tribal confederation to monarchy. It was they who created the need for a standing army, administrative bureaucracy, centralized taxation. The very structure of the Kingdom of Israel, and later of Judah, was shaped in response to the Philistine threat. And it was they who tested, repeatedly, Israel's faith in the invisible God against visible gods, in inferior technology against superior technology, in ancient promises against present military force. Samson, the most famous judge, spent his entire career fighting Philistines. He was born under a Nazirite vow, specifically to begin liberating Israel from Philistine domination. He killed 1,000 Philistines with a donkey's jawbone. He was betrayed by Delilah, a Philistine from the valley of Sorek. He died pulling down the temple of Dagon upon the assembled Philistine elite, killing more in his death than he had killed in his entire life. Samuel, the last judge and first prophet of the monarchic era, led the only spiritual revival that resulted in military victory over the Philistines without battle, the stone Ebenezer of 1 Samuel 7, where thunders from the Lord confused the Philistine army and Israel pursued them without resistance. David, the greatest king, began his public career killing a Philistine champion and ended it expanding the kingdom to borders that the Philistines would never threaten again. Each of these leaders faced the same enemy, each one in a different way, none won by their own strength alone. The Philistines arrived fleeing the collapse of the ancient world. Israel was arriving fleeing Egypt. Two refugee peoples fighting over the same narrow land between the sea and the desert. One brought iron, ships, and superior military organization. The other brought a covenant with the God who created the iron, the sea, and the deserts. For 400 years, the scales swayed. Philistines dominated, then retreated. They captured the ark, then returned it terrified. They killed Saul, then lost Goliath. They controlled the monopoly on iron, then watched the technology escape into the hands of their enemies. Every Philistine victory seemed final. None was. When David finally broke Philistine power, Israel inherited more than territory. They inherited blacksmiths. The technology that nearly destroyed the chosen people built the temple of the living God. The same metallurgical techniques that forged Goliath's spear forged the tools that cut the stones of the Holy of Holies. The Philistines disappeared from history around the 6th century before Christ. Their cities were destroyed, their language forgotten, their gods abandoned. But they left a permanent mark. The name Palestine derives from Philistia, an extinct people named forever the region they tried to conquer. The greatest irony is that Israel needed the Philistines. It was they who forced disunited tribes to become a nation. It was they who created the need for a king. It was they who tested the faith of Samson, the courage of David, the perseverance of Samuel. Without the enemy from the sea, there might never have been a kingdom of Israel. Empires rise and fall. Technologies spread and become obsolete. The iron that seemed a definitive advantage became a commodity in a generation. But covenants made with the eternal cross millennia. The Philistines had iron, ships, and professional armies. Israel had a promise. The iron rusted. The promise remains.